Welcome, I'm Denise Graves, and you're watching Opera America's Oral History Project.
Hello, Mr. Estes.
Hello.
It is such an honor to be in front of the camera with you. And I am a born and brought up New Yorker, and I attended many of your performances at the Metropolitan Opera. I'm just so honored to be able to speak to you today.
Well, I'm honored to speak with you also. And you grew up in New York, so you know everything about New York and the Met and Opera. So I'm honored to speak with you also.
My record at the Met when I was an intern there during my college years, my record was 41 performances in 44 days.
Really?
So, I learned the repertoire there, and it was wonderful that some of those performances were with you.
Well, I feel very blessed. You probably heard me tell Vincent, a lot of people don't know I've sung 102 roles. Someone told me just recently, the only singer who's sung more roles than I have is Placido Domingo. And someone said he has sung 107.
I don't know what his number is. I only know that, every time I wake up, there's yet another role he's doing. It's just remarkable how he goes on and on. But, our 50th anniversary at Opera America was in 2020. And you can imagine that our 50th anniversary celebration was somewhat stunted.
Yes, yes.
And part of what we're doing with our 50th anniversary is to establish here at the National Opera Center a Hall of Fame. And we're so delighted that you are in our first group of inductees, and of course, long delayed induction because of COVID. And we also wanted to create an oral history project where I speak to at least 50 people who have been real pillars in many ways as singers, directors, conductors, designers, as patrons of opera, and have really shaped opera over the last half century. So it's in the context of our looking backward at our 50th anniversary that we just wanted to connect with some real titans in the field. If you've seen my interviews with other artists, you know that I always start off with one question, which is, who brought you to your first opera?
Well, I can tell you who that person was. It was Charles Kellis. He discovered me at the University of Iowa in 1961. He came there and worked with me for 2 years. But before he started working with me, he said, do you know you have a voice to sing opera? And I said, and this is really true, I said, what's opera? Because I come from a small town, Centerville, Iowa. I had never seen an opera in my life. I'd never heard an opera in my life. I'd never heard a symphony orchestra, etc. And so he played some recordings for me of a bass named Cesare Siepi, and I know you know.
Wow.
And Jerome Hines, Leontyne Price, and
Sure.
Maria Callas.
Mm-hmm.
And then he played a symphonic piece of music for me, Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade.
Okay.
And I heard this music, and after I heard it, I said, I really like that stuff. I called it stuff because I'd had no exposure to this type of music in the little town of Centerville. So Charles Kellis, who was my voice teacher, who discovered me at the University of Iowa back in 1961, and I wouldn't be having the honor of speaking with you right now had it not been for Charles Kellis. He's still alive in New York City. He's 19.
Really?
Yes, he's still alive.
Well, because I saw it in your bio, the Old Gold Singers.
Right. That was a choral group representing the University of Iowa in off-campus appearances. And there are 22 singers, and you could not be a music major and be in the Old Gold Singers. And it was the most popular group, but I was the first person of color to sing in that group. I mean, I go back, my college days started in 1956. Right. And so there was a lot of discrimination, even in colleges and universities in those days. But that's exactly what happened to me when I met this man, and he just told me all about opera, and I fell in love. I will never forget the first opera I went to. Mr. Kellis took me to the old Met down on 34th Street or something like that.
Yeah, just up the street here.
Right. I saw Rigoletto with Cesare Siepi as Sparafucile.
Wow.
And then he took me to another one of Don Giovanni with
Uh-huh.
Siepi. And I tell you, I fell in love with that music. And I'm so grateful that my teacher took me to my first performance. And the first performance I saw was at the Metropolitan Opera, the old one.
Wow. How spectacular. And was that your first trip to New York from Iowa to go see an opera?
The first trip was when Mr. Kellis arranged an audition for me at Juilliard School of Music. He said, Simon, after I was at the University of Iowa and I changed my major a number of times and I didn't have money, so sometimes I only went a half a year and then get back and study again. But what your question was, what was it again?
So your first trip to New York was
Yeah,
to,
no, yeah, so he told me, he said, Simon, you need to go to an all musical school because I never studied music. And so he arranged an audition for me for Juilliard when Peter Menon, I don't know if you remember that name,
absolutely.
was the president and Gideon Waldrop was the dean. And so, I must tell you something, this is really true. I was so naive, and having come from a little town in Iowa, I didn't have enough sense to be nervous when I went out to New York. I was excited, just as excited about seeing the tall skyscrapers as I was for auditioning for Juilliard. So he arranged it. I went and I sang my 4 pieces. And when I finished singing, they said, would you just wait outside in the hallway? That was in the old Juilliard up at
Exactly.
125th.
Exactly.
And they called me back in about 10 minutes. And this is a true story. They said, well, we decided we'd like to give you a scholarship, a full scholarship to come to Juilliard. And I was so naive, I didn't realize the magnitude or the importance of Juilliard. And so I said, oh, well, thanks. And they looked at me like I was kind of weird. This is Juilliard School of Music. And you say, oh, well, thanks. And Mr. Kellis had told them I didn't have any money. And they said, and we'll get you a Rockefeller grant. And they said from the Rockefeller family, and I remember it was Martha Baird Rockefeller
Right.
Foundation.
It was Howard Klein. Was it Howard
Yes, and you're right. And I didn't realize the Rockefeller family was the Rockefeller. I didn't know anything about them. I thought it was a family dealing in rocks, and that's the honest truth. And I later found out. So my whole beginning on my journey was rather unusual. Juilliard gives me this scholarship, and I was there 2 years and still there. And then I had a chance to go to Germany and audition for an agent in December 1964. I flew to Düsseldorf and auditioned for Friedrich Posch, who was one of the big agents in Germany at that time. He heard my voice. I actually went over to see my girlfriend, but I couldn't tell people, that I want money to go see my girlfriend. And I had no money as a student at Juilliard. I had a scholarship at Juilliard, but I worked. I washed dishes in the kitchen and served food out on the line. And so I went to the NAACP way back in '61. And I walked in, naive again, and said, oh, my name is Simon Estes, and I have a chance to sing for an agent in opera in Germany. And the receptionist looked at me like I was some kind of a nut. She said, well, we don't have money for something like that. I said, well, it's a wonderful opportunity. And she said, well, okay, I'll let you talk to someone. And I don't remember the person with whom I spoke, but I went in and I told them the same thing. They said, we just don't have funds for people to fly off to Europe. I said, well, I'm a student at Juilliard. They said, you're what? I said, I'm a student at the Juilliard School of Music. And see, that was back in 1961. Not many colored people were in Juilliard.
Yeah.
Their whole idea changed. This is all within an hour's time. And they said, we're very touched with the way you presented yourself. We don't have funds for that, but I'm going to go out in the office and we're going to take up a collection for you to help you. They collected $287 in the office. And then they told me to go to the New York Community Trust Fund.
Sure.
Tell them the NAACP sent you there. And Howard Wilkins was the president of the NAACP in those days. And I went there and they gave me enough money to fly over to Germany. And I was still a student at Juilliard. So I flew over there because I told my girlfriend, I said, I can't go ask for money unless I can tell the truth. I said, I have to tell the truth. And so I told him I had this audition and I sang the 27th, I think it was, of December for this agent. He heard me and then he said, can you stay over to the first of the year? He said, I want to send you to Berlin, to the Deutsche Opera for an audition. And I was just like, goggle. I said, okay, I'll stay. I stayed. I went there, sang for the opera house at the Deutsche Opera. In those days, Richard Castley was there. You certainly know his name.
Wonderful singer.
Wonderful singer. He sang Radames. But anyhow, I sang the audition, and they said, we'd like you to come to April 19th and sing The King in Aida. And I said, well, again, okay. I go back to Juilliard. Go ahead. You wanted to say something.
But you're only 23, 24 at this time.
When I went out to Juilliard, I was 23. Yes. And then I went to Juilliard for 2 years. So that would have been 60, maybe just a little, because I made my debut April 19th, 1965.
Okay.
So anyhow, so I went back. They told me to sing The King in Aida. And so I went back and went to get Dean Waldrop. And I told him about this. I figured they'd be all excited. A student at Juilliard going to the Deutsche Opera in West Berlin and singing The King in Aida. And Gideon Waldrop said, Simon, I'm sorry, you can't go. He said, if you don't finish Juilliard, you will never have a career. My heart just sank. So I went to Christopher West, who was the head of the opera theater within Juilliard back in those days. And he was British. And I told him the story. And he said, Simon, you can't do it. You got to stay and finish Juilliard, or you'll just never have a career. I promise you, I didn't know what to do. I don't know if I prayed about it or what, but something said, go east, young man, go east instead of go west, young man. And Mr. Kellis came to New York at that time too. Also, he taught me The King. I arrived in Berlin and they told me I had to sing Ramfis, which is the biggest bass role.
Yes.
And I'd already learned The King. And it was in German with Richard Castley, Gloria Davy did Aida, etc. And so I called Mr. Kellis from Berlin. He said, he always called me Simone. He said, Simone, I don't understand. He said, but you can do it. I want you to know something. I knew it. I didn't realize God had given me another talent, and that was to memorize. I memorized Ramfis in Aida in about 6 to 7 days. I'd never been on a stage before in my life with an orchestra or a conductor. I didn't meet Gloria Davy or Richard Castley until during the performance. They rehearsed me in a big rehearsal room. None of my artist colleagues were there. Giuseppe Patane was a conductor.
Yeah.
After the performance, he came back to my dressing room and he said, nobody told me you'd never sung opera before and that you were an Anfänger, a beginner. He said, but you did okay. I had never seen a conductor from an orchestra pit. I'd never sung with an orchestra. And he said, and you didn't make any mistakes. And I learned it in 6 to 7 days. And I realized at that point, not only had God given me a talent to sing, but he gave me a talent to memorize. I memorized in German in those few days.
That's absolutely, that's just extraordinary. And what amazes me about that is, as you say, you had never been on an opera stage, had never sung over a pit, over an orchestra, looking at a conductor far away, and you did it for the first time at Deutsche Opera Berlin.
No, I didn't.
What an incredible way to make a debut.
Well, I'm very touched that you know this, how unusual it is, because you're right. I'd never seen a conductor from an orchestra pit, and I'd never sung with an orchestra. And I wasn't nervous. And I don't say that because I was overly confident or cocky. I was simply naive. You don't know the little humble beginnings I come from Centerville, Iowa. So I just knew I had to sing it. And I didn't know I could memorize that. I never did that before in my life. And the coach I worked with at the Deutsche Opera, his name was Hilsdorf. And he taught me Ramfis, and he was shocked himself. And I was just telling you, Giuseppe Patane came back after the performance. Yep. He said, nobody told me that you'd never sung the role before. I would have worked with you. He said, but you were okay. You didn't make any mistakes. And so Mr. Kellis told me to call him after the performance, my voice teacher. And I called him. He said, Simone, how did it go? I said, well, I think it went okay because the director of the Opera House wants me to come see him on Monday. And I said, oh, Mr. Kellis, I said, all of the singers were singing and vocalizing or something before they sang. He said, well, didn't you vocalize? I said, you didn't tell me I had to vocalize before I had to sing. And he said, I'll talk to you when you get back to New York.
Oh
I
my
just walked out
goodness.
on the stage. This is the honest truth. And I just sang. And then they offered me more contracts. And in 1966, the State Department, to this day, I don't know how they knew who I was. They contacted me, wanted me to represent the United States in the first vocal Tchaikovsky competition.
Exactly.
I fly over there. I'd never studied Russian. They said they were going to send me money to study Russian, which they never did. But I flew next to a German actress from East Berlin to Moscow. And she asked me in German, because I spoke a little German then, why are you going to Moscow? I said, the Tchaikovsky competition. She said, oh, wow, wow. She was a Russian, of course. And I said, and I had this song in Cyrillic in Russian. I said, could you teach me a famous song by Tchaikovsky? She taught me phonetically, Ni slova, o drug moi, on the airplane from East Berlin to Moscow.
Unbelievable.
And I arrived, and Irina Zorina was my accompanist in 1966. And I arrived, she said, in broken English, what's in you Russian round two? I said, well, this Ni slova, drug moi, Russian not bad, but we make better. We make better. So after the first round, because the State Department didn't send me, they sent me the music, but no money to study. And so I was advanced to the second round. And in the second round, you had to sing 4 pieces. And one, I sang Grayman's aria. And then I did Ni slovo, drug moi, and all these other songs. And in Grayman's aria, I'm sure you've heard Eugene Onegin in your lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
This aria lasts about 6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I did it in 2 minutes. It's like A section. I left out the whole, I had learned it and all these other Russian songs in 2 days. And I walked out on the stage, but I just had a mental blank. George London was also on the jury.
Oh my goodness.
He talked to me later when we got back. But so when I left out most of the song and the poor accompanist was turning their pages trying to find out where is he? I just finished it. And the people in that Tchaikovsky hall, they all went, oh, they gasped when I missed it. Grayman's aria is like Old Man River in America. And I figured, well, and all the rest of the songs went well. The other 3 things in Russian, and I sang something else, I think, Philip's aria from Don Padlo, whatever. I was sure I was going to be on the next plane to go back home. They advanced me to the 3rd round, and I got the bronze medal. And George London told me back here in the States, he said, Simon, you would have gotten 1st place if you hadn't messed up that aria. He said, but you know why they advanced you? Not only because of your talent, because you didn't fall apart. He said they really were moved that you didn't just collapse on the stage. And that's why they advanced you and you end up getting the bronze medal.
Wow. Now let's pause there for a second because there are several things I want to probe here.
Okay.
When you're talking about 1961 or the early 1960s going to Europe,
Juilliard.
in 1961, Leontyne Price makes her Metropolitan Opera debut to incredible.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yes,
61?
61 is her Metropolitan Opera debut.
Wow.
And you are in Berlin at the time of the Berlin Wall. And,
yes. It had just gone up in 63.
Just this is, and the whole blockade and JFK. So this is an incredible moment of international tension. And there you are in Berlin and flying to Russia. Let's remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you're going to Russia.
And assassination.
So, someone like the great Leontyne Price, was, taking a bit of a hammer to the wall of discrimination in the United States.
Yes.
This was a remarkable moment.
Yes. Well, everything happened so fast. I'm a very spiritual person. It's almost, this whole trip was predestined. I had nothing to do with it. Everything just fell in place because you know yourself, you usually don't sing your first opera at the Metropolitan Opera in the United States and sing a role and never had worked with Jimmy Levine or any other singers, Renato Scotto or Placido Domingo. And I just, to this day, I must honestly tell you, I don't know how I did it, except it was a gift that God gave me to memorize. I could memorize a whole opera, and I did it in 4 days. We were doing Confronting out in Chicago Lyric Opera, and Nikolai Gyarov was singing Kovansky, and the Russian bass who was singing Dossofe was ill. Carol Fox called me on a Sunday. She knew I read Cyrillic. She said, Simon, our bass, because I was there singing Banco in Macbeth. And so she said, Simon, could you possibly learn Dossofe? Make a long story short, that was a Sunday. By Thursday, I had it known. I'd learned it. And the Russian bass got well all of a sudden, so I didn't get a chance to
Of course. Now,
but all of these things are like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You mentioned some important names here, and I just want to probe a little bit. You mentioned Jezebel Siefe, George London, Gyarov, Carol Fox.
Yes.
Of course, your incredible voice teacher who discovered you and advanced you to Juilliard and helped you, a key person in your personal list of saints. He's saint number one. Are there other people in those days who inspired you, who were role models in some fashion, from whom you absorbed wisdom, even if you didn't really know them or study with them? Were there some other people who really played a role?
Yes, Sergius Kogan was one of the coaches and the voice teachers at Juilliard when I went there. And he edited a lot of music. Sergius Kogan, just check around the people and they'll tell you who he was. He's one of the main teachers at Juilliard. The reason I mention him, because you asked me, when Juilliard accepted me, Mr. Kellis went to Juilliard and he said to Sergius Kogan, he said, Sergius, I want Simon to only study with you. Is that possible? And he said, well, yes, of course. He said, don't touch his voice, but work with him on musicianship and diction and repertoire. I can still remember Sergius Kogan telling me when I was singing the Brahms Four Serious Songs of Fear, Ernste Gesänge, he said, Mr. Estes, I want that you know, think that you're out in a field and you're an old man and you're just walking, Dennis Gate. And just think that he touched me about the importance of musicianship. Because again, see, I had never studied music. And so he made an impact on me, but the persons that really motivated me were people like, I remember I went to Met and I heard Jerome Hines sing. And I also heard him sing before I came to Juilliard. When I was a student at the University of Iowa, he came to Iowa City and did a recital.
Yeah.
And so did William Warfield. Now, Bill Warfield was the first Black singer that I knew that had a classical voice. He didn't sing opera, they didn't let him, but he had this. And I remember seeing this Black man on stage. I think I was the only Black person even in the audience back in 1957 at the University of Iowa. And I saw this wonderful man with this voice. I never heard a voice like that before. I'd heard Black voices in churches, but not a classical sound. And then Michael Reese, who was with Columbia Artist Management. Ronald Wilford later on became president. Before him, it was a man named Weinberg or Weinstein, I don't remember, just before Ronald Wilford took over. But Michael Reese was the vice president, and Hattie Clark worked with him. And Michael Reese really inspired me. And he was the best manager. And then he got me in touch with managers, Emmy Tellett in London, Claude Stricker in Paris, all over Europe, he arranged it, and all those managers. But what was interesting, and I just thought of this last night, all of the managers, except for Michael Reese in the United States, were women. In London, in Paris, in Spain, Felicitas Keller, and she was Rafael Frubeck de Burgos' manager, and Claude Stricker in Paris, Emmy Tellett in London, Euredi Eresto, her husband was a conductor in Milano. And I thought that was interesting because I tried to get with some of the male managers, but none of them would take me. And I just thought of this last night. I thought, isn't that interesting? Then a lady named Gudrun Rohrbach became my manager. Now, I don't know what significance that meant, except I know there were two men at managements in in Munich, named Stoll and Schultz. And another one, I forgot his name, but they wouldn't take me. And I always felt that there was some sort of a racial thing there,
Mhm.
that they wouldn't take me. And I remember I had been singing all over Europe at this time, and I called my mother in the early 70s in tears. I said, you know, Mother, I've sung in many opera houses in Europe, and they still won't let me sing in America. And my mother said, well, son, remember what I taught you when you were a little boy and you came home? If you came home and a white boy called you the N word or hit you, what did I tell you? I said, get down on your knees and pray for that boy. She said, now you just get down on your knees and you just pray, son. And after that, I sang in the Met in Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Philadelphia, DC, all the opera houses in America.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I attribute it to my faith and the inspiration that my parents gave me. She said, you must never, my mother and father said, you must never hate white people. You can hate what they do and what they say, but don't hate them as human beings. And my daddy, who couldn't read or write, his father, my grandfather was a slave, sold for $500. I can show you the pictures in the document.
I read that in your biography. It's
Yeah.
just, it's remarkable.
And my father said to me, he couldn't read or write. This is true. He was born in 1891. He said, son, you must get an education. That's something they can't take away from you. And that's why I started realizing the importance of education, was this foundation. And my mother had an incredible voice. If my mother hadn't been born in 1910 and had not been discrimination, she would have been at the Met. My mother could sing a low D that I sing as a bass. She had this incredible voice. She'd never sung classical music though, but she had this incredible voice, and God gave me that voice through my mother and to me.
Now, as American companies weren't hiring you, nonetheless, Lyndon Johnson has you singing at the White House.
The White House.
I mean, and again, you were a young fellow when you
Yes.
won the Tchaikovsky,
Yeah.
gotten an award in the Tchaikovsky competition,
Yeah.
and sang at the White House.
When President Johnson contacted me and wanted me to come, he invited also my mother and my father. My father had since passed away, but my mother had never been on an airplane before in her life. A colored lady born in 1910, getting an official invitation to the White House because her son was singing for the president. And she was nervous. She said, I don't know, I won't know what silverware to use. I said, Mother, just be yourself. I have to tell you this story. I'm sorry I'm taking a lot of your time. Victor Borge, remember Victor Borge?
Absolutely,
Okay.
sure.
My mother was sitting at the table at the White House with Victor Borge and all these rich white people. They were all white, of course, and they were talking about their oil in Texas and Oklahoma. And my mother said, well, I have oil on my land. They said, but you said you were from Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa. She said, yes, I am. But you have oil on your land? She said, yes, my car leaks oil all the time out in the front yard. I thought, Mother, oh, you. And I'll bet you that Victor Borge used that story, this colored lady in Iowa who had oil on her land by a leaking car, but she was at the White House.
I don't know if she was innocent or if she was being very, very smart in making that comment about oil on her land.
Well, my mother was she only had an 11th grade education, but she was very intelligent and she read all the time. She had a great sense of humor, very strict, but I think it was something that was just spontaneous. She liked to joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she just told, couldn't you see Martina Arroyo saying something like that?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Leontyne wouldn't have told a story like that.
That is
Leontyne,
so funny.
right. But Martina would. I mean, people, we all have to, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
I was gonna, and you're right. I mean, Martina and her incredible sense of humor, when she talks about, Tosca and one production where, she said, look, I'm from Harlem. When Tosca kills Scarpia, she leaves the room. She doesn't stick around, that she's so funny.
Yeah, right.
Bayreuth.
Yes.
How did Bayreuth come about and what was that like?
Okay, I had never sung The Flying Dutchman until September 1977. I was in Zurich and Helmut Klaus Drese was the intendant of the Zurich Opera House. in the late 70s. This was like, yeah, 1977. He offered me a job, and I'm a bass baritone. He said, I want you to come to Zurich and sing a new production opening the season in 77 in Macbeth. Well, I thought he meant Banco. I said, well, yes. He said, no, I want you to do Macbeth. I said, oh, that's the title. He said, yes. He said, but I think you can do it with your voice. I said, but I can't do it. He said, why? I said, because my friend, did you ever know a baritone named Norman Mittelman? He sang a lot with Placido. He was a Jewish baritone from Canada, but he made his whole career basically in Europe. He did sing at the Met, Norman Mittelman. So Norman was a baritone. And so I said to Dr. Drese, the head of the opera house, I said, I can't do it because my friend, he sings that role. And I'm singing with him and his wife and his children. And I couldn't do that to my friend. And he looked at me like I was crazy. He said, but wait a minute. He said, I'm offering you a new production, opening the season and the title role. And you're going to do that for a friend? I said, yes. I said, friendship means a lot to me, and I can't do that to Norman. He said, well, I don't have anything else to offer you. He said, come back and see me next year. I go back the next year. He said, I would like you to do Porgy. We've never done Porgy in the history of the Zurich Opera House. I said, but I don't want to do my first performance as Porgy because I'll get stereotyped. And he said, you're rather clever. I said, no, I'm being realistic. He said, well, what if I give you Porgy in February and you open the season in the fall of 77 in the title role of the Flying Dutchman? I thought he meant, I said, you mean Darlan? He said, no, the Dutchman. I said, well, okay. My usual was, well, okay. And so I did the Porgy, and in the fall, I did the Dutchman. During the rehearsal time in August and July, Wolfgang Wagner heard about this Black guy studying the Flying Dutchman. He contacted me through my manager. He wanted me to come and audition. So I flew out. I drove to Bayreuth from Zurich, sang the audition. He said, I want you to open the season next year at Bayreuth, a new production, title role of the Hollander. I said, do you want me to do the Hollander or the Dollar? He said, Den Hollander. And Harry Kupfer did the Inszenierung, and he approved it too. And so I went to Bayreuth, and I had obviously never been on that. The only other Black person that ever sang there was Grace Bunbury. And I was the first Black man to sing there. And some of the press said, we're going to boo that Black man off the stage. He has no right to sing in Wagner's Festspielhaus. This is really true. But it didn't make me angry. It didn't make me scared. I had the contract to do it. I just went there and I did okay. By that time, I had already sung it in Zurich. And the musical director at that time, I can't remember his name, he told Drese he didn't want me to sing The Flying Dutchman because of my skin color. But Dr. Drese, who was the intendant, says, I'm not Simon to sing it. And I sang it, and it ended up being a success there, and it was a success in Bayreuth. And I think, again, naivety was beginning to subside now, go down a little bit. But I wasn't nervous when I went to Bayreuth. And I'll have to tell you something with a lot of humility. God really has been good to me. He gave me a talent to sing. He gave me a talent to love. He gave me a talent not to hate people. He gave me a talent to want to help. And when I sing, I don't know how to explain it to you. I have a certain sensation when I'm singing certain operatic repertoire that I can't describe it, but I'm so joyful and so happy. And every performance that I sing, I always pray before. And I always say, God, I hope and pray through the talent of singing that you've given to me, that some person or persons in the audiences, their hearts will be touched to love one another. And that's the message that comes out through me when I sing. I love music, I love people, and I hope that music and the talent that God gave me will help us to love one another.
Wow. It's remarkable to listen to your wisdom and your patience and your dignity through all of this. And there must have been years, though, when you were having this success in Europe, when you began to wonder, why weren't you singing in Chicago or the Met or the Met?
Well, you're right. I did. And I when I told you I called my mother, maybe I didn't finish it. I called my mother in, I don't know, mid-70s, just because I've been singing them since 65. And I said, Mother, they won't let me, I'm not singing at the Met. Carol Fox did engage me, though, to sing Banco in Macbeth. And Sarah Caldwell invited me to come to Chicago. Two women again. I always think that's interesting.
That's very interesting.
So I'm going to say, people can imagine what that's. And Sarah Caldwell let me come there, and I sang a Flying Dutchman. Later on with Sarah Caldwell. What else did I? Oh, and I did the title role of Figaro, and I did Banco in Beth, and a Greek-based Pascalis sang Macbeth. Those two, but Herbert Adler did also. He was the only male intendant and director of an opera house that invited me to sing in those early years. And he, in fact, it was 1968, he invited me to come and sing in a summer season. They had some kind of a summer program for young artists or something. And I did the four villains in the Tales of Hoffmann. And Kurt Adler did that. But otherwise, the other opera houses wouldn't. The director of the Atlanta Opera was singing with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. The director of the opera heard me singing, and he knew who I was. He called me over to the opera house in Atlanta, and he said, Simon, I would really like to engage you to come here and sing. He said, but if I engage you, some of my donors said they will not give us any money. And he said to me, this was a white man, he said, I want you here, and I wish I could engage you, but we have to have the money in order to perform. He said, I think it's wrong, and please forgive me. And you know what? I admired that man because he told me the truth. And other people would say, oh, well, you're George Scholder and Seiji Ozawa. I had a chance to sing the whole ring cycle in Bayreuth after I'd done Parsifal with Jimmy Levine on Fortas, Wolfgang, and I'd done the Hollander. Wagner wanted me to do the whole ring cycle. And so I swallowed my pride. Scholey said I had to come audition. Can you imagine that I already sung the Flying Dutchman in Bayreuth? I had to swallow my pride and audition. When I got through singing, Schulte said, well, you have a beautiful voice, but how do you expect to sing Wotan in Bayreuth? You're black. I said, but I've already sung there. He said, yeah, but I'm Jewish. He said, now, it's going to be a problem enough for me. And then I bring you, if I can get rid of one problem, why shouldn't I get rid of the problem? I said, well, why do I have to be gotten rid of? He said, well, I just can't do it. And so that did hurt me. I want to tell you, that hurt me. And that was maybe I auditioned sometime late winter. And Schulte had a house in Roccamare, which is right on the coast of the Mediterranean. And some friends of mine had a house, and I think my ex-deceased father-in-law, they had a house on the Mediterranean. Schulte's was right next to his. So I went down during the summer. They told me he was there vacationing. I went there. I knocked on his door. I said, Sir George, I want to talk to you. Hello, Simon, he says. He said, well, come over this evening. So I went over that evening. I said, you know, I've really been sad since you wouldn't accept me to sing the ring cycle when Wolfgang Wagner wanted me to sing it because of my skin color. I said, you know, nobody complains if Placido sings Otello. Nobody complains if Maria Callas or Renato Tebaldi sings Aida. And you know what he said to me? And I believe it. He said, you know, Simon, I never thought of it. I just never thought of it. I said, I know you didn't think of it because Black people didn't sing opera. But I said, composers wrote for voices. They didn't write for skin color. Right. They wrote for vocal categories. I went through all of this with him. When I finished talking with him, he said, well, you know what? You've convinced me. He said, but I'll have to talk to Peter Hall, who's doing the production. Yep. And so I said, no, talk to him. So he talked to Peter Hall. I said, well, Simon, would you fly to London? He said, I want you to sing for Peter Hall. He's never heard you sing. So I went in Schulte's house. I sang the audition. Schulte flipped over. Peter Hall said, well, his voice is much too big for this room, Sir George. Call my car. And that's all he said. And I got a telegram, Columbia Artist Management, Michael Reese got the telegram the next day saying, Sir Peter Hall won't take Simon because of his skin color. He said, if Simon sings Wotan in Bayreuth, all of the singers have to be black in all of the 4 operas, and we can't find enough singers, black singers to do it. But Schulte said this to me, he said, but to show you how much I admired your voice and your talent, Simon, I will engage you with the quickest possibility with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, which he did. He did Simone Boccanegra, I did Fiesco, and he did a Beethoven Ninth with me singing. But he did give me a chance, and he said, I'm sorry about that, Simon. But when I talked with him in Italy and talked that, he never thought about it. And see, a lot of racism sometimes, people aren't blatantly racist. It's just, in quotes, the way it was in those years until Leontyne Price really opened the door. Some other singers of color sang at the Met, as you know, but Leontyne really opened the door.
Yep.
And I remember one time I wanted to talk to Leontyne. This is very private, and I know Leontyne would not object my telling you this. I went to talk to her about some racial problems in business. And she said this to me. She said, Simon, it's going to be more difficult for you than it was for me. I said, no, Leontyne. I said, I know what you've gone through. And she told me some stories. This is something you may not know. You know, the people from Laurel, Mississippi who sponsored Leontyne, they were white people, of course. When she went back for Christmas holidays or whatever from Juilliard, she still had to go in the back door.
Really?
That hurt her, but she swallowed her pride and she went to the back door to go in their house.
Wow.
And also she got letters, I don't know if you might know about this, saying if you opened the Metropolitan Opera in Antony and Cleopatra, we're going to kill you. She had letters threatening her life. And then she tells me, Simon, it's going to be more difficult for you. I said, no, Leontyne. I said, you were the groundbreaker for us. And she said, Simon, no. She said, it's going to be tough. I'm quoting Leontyne now, and I would never quote her. I know her really well. We've sung together in San Francisco at the Met, and I would say I'm as close as I could be to her. She said, it's going to be more difficult for you. She said, because you're a Black man, you're intelligent, you're independent, and I'm not saying this about myself, but she said it. She said, and you're handsome. And she said, you're going to be a threat. She said, but whatever you do, don't you ever give up. And when we first sang together was out in San Francisco, when Luciano was singing his first Radames, and Leontyne was out there singing La Forza del Destino.
Right.
And Margaret Price was singing the Aida. Did you hear that by any chance?
I know that story. I didn't realize that you were in that cast, though, because I know that story.
Right. Well, Luciano came. What?
Who was the Omneris? And that was it Grace?
No, it was,
Was it Shirley Baret?
Tochishka.
Okay.
Tochishka, that's what she pronounced her name. She sang the Omneris. Because I remember Jean-Pierre Pournelle said, he said, Simon, because I did a lot of productions with Pournelle. He said, the 2 best people in that cast were you and Tochishka. Jean-Pierre said that. But what happened, Margaret Price got sick and Leontyne had to jump in because she knew Aida, of course. At her, would Leontyne, you do it? Leontyne had never heard me sing live. We were rehearsing in front of the whole cast, and in our Aida Amanazzo duet, I got to get that in the right order. She started crying in rehearsal. She said, Simon, singing next to you is like singing next to a black god. And tears are going down her cheek. I said, Leontyne, no, you're the one. She said, Simon, no. I will never forget that. Wow. And it was just a wonderful, moving experience to sing that role with her and to be her daddy. And she
in some of Verdi's most beautiful music.
Yes, unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
I didn't realize that you were in that famous Aida where one price substituted for another price.
Exactly. And I think of Florence Price, the only Black female composer of classical music. Have you heard of Florence Price? I was just here. That's interesting. We're talking today. Excuse me, I'm getting emotional. She was the only Black woman who composed classical music. And I was listening to her 4th symphony today when I was driving. Florence Price.
Yep.
Leontyne Price.
Repertoire, and gosh, I mean, what you've been saying now about your experience is just so moving. Thank you for sharing all of that. You've talked about Mozart, Figaro, and you've talked about Verdi and Kovanchina and Wagner and Ring Cycle and Dutchman and all of it. I mean, was there a repertoire in which you felt most comfortable?
You know, I have to, sometimes a man taught me 2 years ago, if you can imagine that, here in Iowa. His name was Thomas Phillips. He was a very important Black man in Iowa. He was with Pioneer Corn. I don't know if you've ever heard of Pioneer Corn, you're out in New York, but he was one of the executives. And he said, Simon, it's wonderful that your mother taught you to be humble. He said, but you're not humble and you're not bragging and you're not boasting if you present facts to people. F-A-C-T-S, facts.
Mm-hmm.
He said, don't be, because I would never talk about myself. And the question you just asked me, it's hard for me to answer that because I want to always be humble and I don't want you to think that I'm some great, I've never said I was a great singer. I've never said that. I always say I go out and try to do my best.
Mm-hmm.
And then when someone, what was the question you asked me again?
Yeah, about the breadth of your repertoire and whether there's a particular composer you just feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, well, I have sung so many composers, if you stop and think. Strauss, for example, I've sung Oreste and Electra. I've sung John the Baptist. I've sung the title role of Boris Godunov in German and in Russian.
Mm-hmm.
I've sung most of Verdi's operas, some baritones, some title roles, and some basses. And as I say, my repertoire, I've sung Scorca. I've sung Zarastro.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know anything else I really want to sing because I've sung 102 roles. And I've sung La Boheme with Pavarotti and Freni. I sang the Birgit Nielsen at Wotan. And Nielsen said something that I say with the greatest amount of humility. When I sang with her that third act in Valkyrie, she said, Simon, the two greatest Wotans with whom I've ever sung were George London and Hans Hodder. She said, but your voice is more beautiful. And she said, don't stay in Bayreuth too long and get the Bayreuth bark. And I listened to her. I didn't stay there too long. I could have stayed longer. But she said, don't stay too long. And what Leontyne Price said to me, those two women, it humbles me to say, when Lynn said, Simon, you sound like a black god. Yeah. I've sung Schubert. I've done so many Schubert songs and Brahms songs and Gustav Mahler songs. The beginning of my career, when they didn't let me sing opera, I did lots of recitals. The first year I got with Columbia Artist Management, I did 45 recitals throughout the United States and Canada. Mm-hmm. I got $500 a concert. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know what was happening then either. But you know what? I was learning musicianship. I was learning stage presence. And I remember when I sang my first Wotan, Hollander and Bayreuth, someone wrote a critic, Simon Estes is the first person who sings Wagner bel canto. Mm-hmm. Doesn't scream it all out. Nielsen told me don't bark. But singing Schubert and Brahms and all of that repertoire, I didn't realize I was being discriminated against, and I was sad. I want you to know I was sad that they wouldn't let me sing opera. But on one hand, it was almost like a blessing in disguise, because at the beginning, I didn't sing all of these big, heavy roles. I just sang Schubert. And I could, God bless me, I just loved all that music and Brahms. I don't know.
In my conversation with Cheryl Milnes, he said the good thing about doing song recitals, as you've just described, is that you get to be a musician without worrying about high notes.
Well, I hadn't heard that one before.
When you do opera, you're worrying about that high note. In the song literature, you get to be a musician without the worry.
And you know, I tell all young singers, I mean, I've taught all over. I've lectured at Harvard and Duke University, Moscow Conservatory, Australia, you name it. I tell young singers, don't just start singing opera, sing recitals. I said, it'll be good for your voice. It teaches you musicianship. It teaches you that you don't have to just give that power all the time. Mm-hmm. And I said, sometimes something very soft can touch people's hearts. I said, when I sang with Montserrat Caballé in her career, I've sung with Caballé since 1966. I will never forget her pianissimi. I was singing Julius Caesar in Carnegie Hall. I still remember that. That was 1967 with Montserrat Caballé. And of course, she was young then. And she was floating these high pianissimo notes. And it was concert version. And I was just sitting there, the skinny colored kid from Centerville, Iowa, just like, can't believe it. And the conductor said, Simon, stand up, you got to sing. I forgot to stand up and sing. I was mesmerized because of a pianissimo.
Yep.
Pianissimo, see. And I tell singers, everything doesn't have to be like that. And if you sing recitals, you'll sing longer. I'm
Yep.
83, and I can tell you right now, I can sing a lot of the repertoire. You'd be surprised.
I know, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm listening to your speaking voice, and I know that that voice is still right there.
And that's only, I tell people, I just sang last year before the COVID. I did a big concert with the Des Moines Symphony Orchestra outdoors, and 100,000 people were there. Joseph Junta, who's been the conductor of the Des Moines Symphony Orchestra for over almost 40 years, his wife was there, and she was a singer. The next day, he called me after the concert that I had sang, and there were 100,000 people on the steps of the Capitol. He called me. He said, Simon, I have to tell you what Carrie said when we got home last night. He said, Carrie said, Joseph, Simon Estes. She said, I was crying tears. And I said, Simon Estes is a living miracle.
Wow.
Then I have to tell you, that's what my wife said. Now, I believe miracles are done by God. I really do. A miracle is a miracle. And I know that this voice, this talent that I have is not from me, it's from God. And I'm not trying to push my faith and my religion on you, because I know at 83, I should not be able to sing this way. And I just sang last Thursday with the Iowa State University Wind Ensemble. They did a July concert, and they asked me to come sing. There were 5,000 people there. And they said, how can you sing like that? And I said, it's not Simon, it's God singing through me, and God is love.
Well, you know, I want to talk for, you know, the last set of questions I have here is about, in a way, the way you give, not only vocally, but I'm thinking about the Simon Estes Foundation and the Iowa, is it Iowa Children Care, the name of it.
Yes.
And you have the Simon Estes, or the Estes Children's Foundation. So, and a lot of these are involved in dealing with malaria in Africa, with HIV/AIDS has been a commitment of yours. Tell me about that part of your work, and how thinking about malaria and AIDS, malaria in Africa has become a focus of yours. How did you become committed to that eradication?
In 2010, I was asked to sing for the grand finale concert of the World Cup in Johannesburg, South Africa. And Andrea Bocelli and I were the two main soloists at the Coca-Cola Dome in Johannesburg. And I founded the Simon Estes Music High School even before that in South Africa, in the Cape Town area. So anyhow, before I went out to sing, the moderator said, not for my benefit, but there were 12,000 people in that dome, talked about malaria, and that every 30 seconds, a little Black child in Africa was dying from malaria. 90% of all of the malaria deaths in the world were in sub-Saharan Africa, and 1 million children were dying every year from malaria. And I never heard that before. Before I went out on the stage to sing, they said, now don't forget to talk about yourself, Simon. I went out, I said, I'm not going to talk about myself. I heard something tonight that I never knew. I didn't know we still had malaria. We eradicated malaria in the United States in 1951, 1952. Of course, I thought it was all over the world. So that really touched my heart. I'll make a long story short. My wife, I came back, my wife was with me. We flew out to Washington, D.C. to the United Nations Foundation. I called them up, they gave me an audience. I said, I heard this statistic I told, and they said, it's absolutely true. I said, you mean to tell me in this particular year, 1 million children are dying? They said, yes. So I decided to do a concert at Iowa State University, where I'm a professor. I got 1,000 white high school students from 52 high schools to sing a Christmas concert with me in 2013, the 15th of December. We did a Christmas concert, and that concert we raised $100,000. I gave every penny to the United Nations. And then I realized I needed to do more. So I met a very important man. I won't tell his name. And I said, can you help me raise money? I said, I don't want you to donate anything to me. I don't want you to give me anything. I said, I will work for it. And so he called me a week later, said, come out, I want to help you with your project. He's the wealthiest man in Iowa. So you could look it up, but I won't tell you his name. And so he arranged for me to meet a number of people to do concerts. And so I did concerts, and within 6 months, I raised $432,000. I sent every penny to the United Nations, nothing but nets. I could show you my studio here. They called me the singing ambassador for the United Nations Foundation, and they've given me plaques and that sort of thing. And then when I was in Zurich, one of the richest countries in the world, this was in the late 70s, early 60s, and I was singing all the time at the Zurich Opera House. I was living there, my wife, we had 2 children born in Switzerland, 1 in the States. But the Children's Hospital, they only had 2 cabins for children who've had bone marrow transplants. When they have leukemia, they have to live in a sterilized environment for up to 6 months. They had 2 little cabins the size of this room here, and children were dying. So I went to the Children's Hospital. I said, why don't you have more? Because I was already doing some work for children in Europe. So now they said, well, we don't have room or something. So anyhow, I did a concert at the Tonhalle. That's the Carnegie Hall of Zurich. And we raised over $400,000 Swiss francs. At that time was almost the same, but over 400,000 Swiss francs. I gave it all to the Children's Hospital. I went to talk to the director of the hospital. I said, why haven't you built something? He said, we don't have any room. I said, I can tell you how you have room. I said, you see that wall? Knock that wall down and put in 2 of these plastic cabins. They're like tents. Oh, we never thought of that, they said. So they did. And I have a picture I can show you, all these little children. Wow. God has called me to do this. I believe that love is stronger than hate. And I believe that kindness is so important, and we have to care, and we want to help. Everybody can't be perfect. Everybody can't do everything. But music has been an avenue for me that has enabled me, and I always say God working through me, that I've helped save hundreds of thousands of children's lives in this world, and nobody knows about it. I'm telling you now and a few other people, but I don't talk about it unless someone asks me. And it's all because of music and singing that has enabled me to do this. And I'm still doing it till this day.
You are inspiring. I can't wait for people to hear this interview and to realize the power of your words. You know, the last question I had for you today, you're born in Iowa, Centerville, Iowa.
Yes.
And you have sung in every opera capital of the world.
84 different opera houses and 115 different symphony orchestras from Australia to Japan to all over the world.
So you could, as you know, a great opera singer, those are my words, lived in New York or Vienna or Paris or London, and you're back in Iowa. So what does Iowa mean to you?
Well, my roots are here, and this tour that I have sung where I made all of this money, I want to see something. Oh, don't move. I'll show you something.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you read
Look
it?
at that. Yes, it's fabulous.
Okay, that's when I knew about malaria. I didn't know about it. And, excuse me. Now what was your question again? Because I've been up since.
You're back in Iowa. You could be any place in the world.
I was, I've been all over the world. So I was a professor at Boston University, and I'd been there 6 years, and I could have still been there. In fact, they offered me to be dean of the whole school of University of Boston. But my wife said, Simon, and this was 8 years ago, I think, She said, "You're not getting any younger. Why don't you slow down and just go out and help people, children in Iowa?" So I thought about it. And while I was there, they invited me over to Harvard. I did things, I did lectures at Harvard, MIT. I did things for their medical school. I was an obedient husband. So I said, okay, we'll go back to Iowa. We came back to Iowa and I decided to do a Roots and Wings 99 county tour.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I want to sing in all 99 counties. I've now done 56, and we had to cancel some that were planned because of COVID. But now the next one will be October 24th in a town here in Iowa, and another one on November 21st at a university here in Iowa. And so I'm going to keep raising money to help these children, but my wife said, come back. And so in a few years, I have given over $200,000 to high school graduating seniors here in Iowa to go to a university or college, wherever they want to go and study whatever they want to study, because they need funds and money to go. So I decided to come back to Iowa and do that. And I've sung now in 56 counties. And then the day after the concert, they have a general assembly, and they asked me to talk to all of the students in that county. And so I talked to them about education, about love, about being a human being, about being kind. They want to learn. When I tell them when I was a kid in Centerville, colored people, as we were called, we couldn't swim in the swimming pool with white people. Then eventually they would let us swim on Saturdays from 9 o'clock to 11. We had to get out of the swimming pool. They put more disinfectant into the water. I can tell you tons of stories of discrimination. But my mother and my daddy said, son, don't ever hate people. The strongest statement that either of my parents made to me about white people, all those years I was growing up in Centerville, my mother said this, it's in the form of a question or in the form of a statement. She would just say, son, I don't know why white people treat us colored people this way. They never told us to hate white people. They just always said, turn the other cheek, kill them with kindness. And so I came back to Iowa, where my roots were, where I was born, in a little town in Centerville, Iowa. I was born in a house 27 feet by 25 feet. The doctor came out and delivered me from my mother's womb because colored people couldn't go to the hospital and have babies. And that same doctor that delivered me breastfed on my grandmother's slave's breast. And isn't that a whole circle? This is absolutely true. I could show you pictures of my grandfather who was a slave sold for $500. $500. And his wife, my grandmother, breastfed the doctor who delivered me from my mother, Dr. Brunnett.
Wow.
That's
a reason to go back and live in Iowa, to be a part of the roots, the ground that gave you life. It's just remarkable.
I feel so blessed and so humble, and I'm so honored and humbled to talk with you. And this is not to try to sell Simon Estes.
No. The honor's mine.
I'm just a servant. I'm a servant of God's. And people say, who is God? God is love, and love is God. And if you love someone, you're not going to lie to them. You're not going to lie about them. You're not going to hurt them. If they need help, you're going to help them. If they make a mistake, you're going to forgive them, because none of us is infallible.
Yeah.
And we have to let love control us. And love is music. My daughter, my oldest daughter, gave me a beautiful plaque, and it says, love is the music of the soul. Mm-hmm. And I have it in my bedroom on my shelf. Love is the music of the soul. And all the students that I work with, whether they're at Juilliard or Boston University or Iowa State University, I tell the students, don't only sing with your technique, which is vitally important. I say, but sing from your soul and your heart. And that's what will touch the people.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how fabulous it is to spend this time with you. I'm so grateful that you've allowed me into your studio, into your life this morning. I can't wait to greet you in person. And I just wish you Godspeed in your good work and look forward to more communication between us. Thank you so much for this time.
I thank you and God bless you. And you have an incredible face. I really mean that. I've seen people's faces all over the world, but the moment you came on the screen, I've never met you before, but you have a wonderful countenance and you're very blessed with that.
Well, I really appreciate that from you. That's an incredible compliment.
It's really true.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good rest of day. And
God bless you. Shalom, shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.